specialist in the Google Cloud team. So today I'm going to be presenting about Anthos application modernization platform. So in terms of the agenda for the today's session, so I will cover about 30 to 40 minutes of slides, and the last 20 minutes I will do a demo of the platform. So just a little bit of a background before I kind of get started, right? I'm pretty sure a lot of the folks here would have heard about the Anthos platform, and again, because there is a lot of marketing stuff, that is generally floated around. People, have different ideas about the platform. So I kind of wanted to, get that's clear for the people, right? So it's a platform for doing hybrid and multi-cloud. It's not a single hardware product. It is a complete platform which has different software stacks that is combined together to create a single hybrid or multi-cloud platform. Again, we will cover this in a lot more detail, but at a very high level, what Anthos is about is a hybrid or a multi-cloud platform. So there are some marketing stuff in these slides, but what I will try to do is kind of run this through pretty fast and focus more on the technical side. The marketing stuff is just to kind of give a background as to the problem we try to solve, and how do we look at the problem, right, and the use cases and the areas where this platform is targeted towards, right? So in terms of the statistics that this particular slide says, business leaders consider technology teams as pretty critical, right? And that's pretty obvious. And what generally the CIOs admit is, in terms of the agility, right? Just by doing a migration, right, to the cloud, the agility is not reached, right? There are few aspects from an agility perspective that they get when they migrate to cloud, but majority of the CIOs admit they don't get the agility they desire by migrating to the cloud, right? And there are different factors that impact not having agility when moving to the cloud, right? Most of the cases when enterprises make the decision to move to cloud, they have a system that is built over a long time, right? It's not like a one-shot moment that they go from on-prem to cloud, right? And there'll be a kind of a systems that is common to both the places, or has presence in both the places. And when you have that, you will tend to have multiple technology stacks across the on-prem and cloud, multiple management platforms, multiple software stacks. And then in the on-prem, you will have underutilized resources, long refresh cycles. So this combination of multiple platforms, right, throws a whole bunch of challenges. And typically what we have also seen is innovation from, let's say, a consumer domain to an enterprise domain, right? Enterprise domain, if you look at it, the innovation has been more or less flat. But in the consumer domain, enterprise innovation is pretty steep, right? And that is because every enterprise is a snowflake, right? And that's because every enterprise has a whole bunch of legacy that they would have built over a long period. And typically within an enterprise, IT is typically forced to make trade-offs, right? And the trade-offs could be in one of these three verticals, right? The first could be between security and agility, right? So if you look at it from a developer, they want to have the latest tools, languages, and plugins. But from a security team perspective, right, they would want to have all validated tools. So every tool or new stack that you're going to introduce will go through a complete validation system, right? So there's always a conflict between the two. The second conflict could be between the reliability and the cost. So as much of high availability that you want to have, that is going to add to the cost, right? You want to have redundancy, but you also want to minimize your cost. And the last point is very critical, right? The portability versus lock-in. See, when you have a single vendor, you get the consistency, but then when you have a single vendor, you also get locked in, right? You are not you do not have the freedom to try different stacks open source way, right? So that's the kind of trade-off that folks are always looking at, right? And what is Google's point of view, right? Um, so the way Google's think has thought about this problem is, and that is based on a lot of the things that we have learned in Google over the last 15 years, right? The future of applications and infrastructure is to be created with containerized microservices, which is managed through a declarative system with a single control plane, which uses a service mesh to span across all applications. It's a pretty big definition, but we will cover each one of them as we kind of go forward, right? And if you look at what are the tenets on which Anthos is built, right? These are the 6 tenets on which Anthos is built. One, it's built on open software with a microservices based principle. And once we talk about microservices, we also talk about containerization. The deployment pattern should be agile, so a lot of CI/CD and DevOps is built in with an orchestration in mind. And we look at the applications as a bunch of services which can talk through APIs both from an internal and external perspective. So this is a Forrester report in terms of again, I would not go into each of the metrics, but we looked at some of the customers who are using Anthos, and we try to compare the TCO of the customer's environment with and without Anthos, right? And what are the benefits that they get, by using Anthos? Okay, so if you look at, I talked about, why Anthos till now, right? Okay, now we're going to talk about what are the benefits of the, Anthos platform, right? The first benefit is, we're talking about modernize anywhere. So what does it mean, right? So we want to meet the customers where they are, which means that if you want to modernize your infrastructure stack or application stack, it is not necessary that you need to come to the cloud to do the modernization. You should be able to modernize in whichever location you are in, right? So if you're in on-prem, you should be able to modernize your applications on-prem. So that is the first principle, right? Second is, put security guardrails in place. So when customers have different environments, right, which is say on-prem and even multi-cloud, right, we want to be in such a way that the security policies should be applicable in one common location, and that should propagate across different environments, right? You do not need to think of security separately within on-prem versus cloud. You want to think of it as security policies which is available in a central location and be applicable to all the different environments that you have in different locations. And that kind of brings into the consistency, right? So it's a platform that tries to bring in a consistent experience across different environments. And we want to have a single pane of glass. That is the unified management piece talks about, where the control plane could be distributed, data plane could be distributed, but we want the management plane to be single, so that you have visibility into all the resources and the monitoring aspect and everything in a central location. So we did talk about the portability and lock-in. So it's based on open source technologies. We'll talk about what are the technologies it's based out of as we go forward, right? And lower cost of total cost of ownership, right? So that is, at the end of the day, that is very important from an enterprise perspective. So these are some of the customers and quotes, but I'll kind of skip some of these. Okay, so I think going forward, I think we'll focus more on the technical side of the things. So this particular slide talks about what are the core components of Anthos. Each of this block would kind of split into a lot of further blocks as we go forward. But if you look at the 5 building blocks, right? These are the 5 building blocks from an Anthos perspective, right? So if you look at from a bottommost layer, this is the container management. So basically, if you look at it, right, Google Kubernetes Engine is our managed Kubernetes service. So what we have tried to do is take a version of our Google Kubernetes Engine and the ability to run that in on-prem or in multi-cloud, right? So that is our managed Kubernetes service, wherever Anthos platform is going to reside, right? So that is how it will work. Then you have Anthos Service Mesh, which is based, it's a managed Istio service, And again, this can run in any location. And again, I'll talk about this more in detail as we go forward. And the last one is, serverless, right? So we do not think serverless has to be restricted to just the cloud. So here, what we can do is be able to run serverless in your on-prem location by basing the serverless on the Knative open source project. So if you look at each of these blocks, right, one common thing is this is Kubernetes, this is Istio, this is Knative. So at the end of the day, this complete stack is an open source based stack, but it is managed by Google, right? So that's the beauty of this, right? So on the right hand side, what you see is Stackdriver, which is our monitoring and logging solution. So we give an option to the customer where if they want to have a managed service like Stackdriver, they can use it. But if they want to go with an open source solution like say Prometheus or Elk Stack for logging monitoring, they can as well go and use that. And we have good integration stories with any of the common open source software stacks. So then you have the Anthos config management. So this is a very, very critical piece of this complete solution. So I talked a lot about common policies, common security metrics and everything, right? So everything with respect to the configuration and policies is maintained in a central location. So what we are calling this as a GitOps style config and policy management. So typically when we talk about GitOps style, we talk about it for general Kubernetes manifest configuration, right? Or infrastructure maintained as code. So we are kind of taking that to one more level where even the configurations and policies, right? They also will be maintained as code, and each of your different environments will sync to this common repository which has a config and policy and get is exactly similar configuration and policies, right? Again, each of these blocks I'll talk more about it. And from a deployment perspective, right, this is how it would look like, right? So Anthos can run on Google Cloud, right? Or it can run on-prem. So in the on-prem, currently we run it on top of VMware platform. In this year, later in the roadmap, we'll also be able to run this on bare metal, and later we will also be able to run it on other hypervisors. Other clouds, we have launched AWS, Anthos and AWS as alpha, and Azure will follow soon. The last one is a little interesting, right? We can also run Anthos on Edge. So this is again in the roadmap. So what we are saying here is, since this being a platform, you should be able to take this and run it in any location, whether it is edge, which could be a telecom edge, a consumer edge, enterprise edge, any of the locations, right, where you want the compute to be close to where the operation is going to be performed, right? So that is how the complete ecosystem of Anthos would play in. So one thing I forgot to mention earlier here is something called as the Anthos Marketplace. I think I'll talk about this in detail later, right? So what we are doing is, since this is a complete software-based stack, any application that we deploy on top of Anthos will be certified and will be available in our marketplace for customers to deploy. And the certified applications can run in any location the customer is preferring, whether it is on-prem, GCP, or in any other cloud, right? As long as it is maintained by the Anthos platform. Okay, so this slide talks about a little bit the same thing at a little bit more granular level. So here, we talk about infrastructure management, which is a GKE, cluster management. So for example, if you have multiple clusters, right? Let's say one cluster is in on-prem, another is in GCP. How do you do multi-cluster from a load balancing perspective, right? So if you want to have some service traffic going to on-prem, some service traffic going to cloud, so using Ingress for Anthos, we will be able to load balance between different Kubernetes clusters, right? So it's not like really federation, but it's more about how multi-clusters can talk to each other, as well as load balance across different clusters. And the service mesh, we talked about policy enforcement. Um, this I'll talk about this a little later. Development aspect also, right? I think I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I think if there are questions, I will take that later. Okay, so we talked about these different modules, right? So from a system block diagram perspective, right? How does it look like, right? So let's say on the left-hand side, we have here GCP platform. On the right-hand side, there is an on-prem data center. Now let's say Anthos is running in, both these locations, right? How would it look like, right? So the way typically we do this is, um, we have for each of the components I talked about, there is a agent kind of a system that runs inside the on-prem. For example, there is a service mesh component, there is a config management, there is a GKE on-prem, right? This will talk to the components that is running in GCP. Now, the important fact to remember here is, we do not have, let's say, clusters distributed between two locations. So when we say GKE on-prem runs in on-prem, we don't have master running in GCP and slave running in, or slave or worker running in on-prem, right? So from a control and data plane perspective, right, everything that is running in on-prem is self-sufficient. And that has been our design philosophy from the beginning, right? And why that is important? It's important because let's say that if you lose your connectivity between your on-prem to GCP platform, right? Now everything will run as it is. Now the only thing that you will not be able to do is that from the GCP console, you will not be able to configure new services. Whatever services you have configured earlier will continue to work, right? So that is critical from the complete design perspective. And similarly, the policy repository, right? So policy repository can be kept in on-prem because in certain customer environments, they are very particular about the data have to stay in on-prem and should not leave to cloud, right? So that is a perfect use case for Anthos, where we can keep everything kind of running in on-prem itself. Just one more thing I kind of want to highlight in this slide, right? So some of the applications that we are seeing, and I mentioned Anthos being a platform, right? What we also see going in the roadmap as forward is, we see a lot of services that consumers, or enterprises like in GCP, but for whatever reason, they cannot come to the cloud and use the services because it could be a regulatory or a compliance kind of a needs, right? So the way we are positioning Anthos platform is, you can run your any of the cloud services on top of Anthos in your on-prem. So I give an example, like say Cloud Run, which is a serverless platform, right? Some of the customers come and say, I like a lot of GCP's ML services, but if I want to use the ML services, I need to come to the cloud, right? Now that, the capability of Anthos being present in on-prem also gives the customers a path to run their ML services in the on-prem, right? So over the long run, what we also see this is giving the capability to extend cloud services to on-prem, right? So that's a nice way of extending the services to on-prem. I think I'll kind of run through the remaining sections pretty fast. So till now, what I've talked about is kind of the basic building blocks. In the next set of slides, I kind of talk a little bit deep about these blocks, and then maybe I'll spend around 10-15 minutes, and then we'll go to the demo. So manage Kubernetes, I kind of talked about it. So Kubernetes in GCP, we call it as a Google Kubernetes engine. And when we run it on-prem, we call it as Anthos Google Kubernetes engine. It's pretty much the exact replica of the native Kubernetes service, just that it is kind of more managed. I think I'll kind of skip some of these things because it's kind of this. Okay. So what are some of the principles we used in terms of when we used Anthos GKE on VMware, right? So as much of native Kubernetes constructs, when we did this on top of VMware platform, as much as possible, we try to use the underlay networking, because by using the underlay networking, we can get some of the efficiencies of the VMware platform. We support both L4 and L7 load balancing, and we also try to make sure whatever infrastructure that the customers have in on-prem, they should be able to use it as it is in Anthos. Say, for example, the customer has a particular load balancer in on-prem, or a particular firewall, or a particular networking switch, or a particular storage device. So Anthos being a software stack, as much as possible, we have tried to make sure that we do not disturb the customer environment, and this kind of fits in well with what the customer already have in their on-prem environment. The same thing would also apply when we do this on AWS. So we're going to launch that in the this quarter. The same principles would apply, right? As much as possible, we don't want to touch the native constructs that is available in a particular environment. Okay, so this particular slide talks about how the internals would look like, right, when we deploy this in uh, uh, the GKE on-prem in VMware, right? I think there's a lot of components here, but at a very high level, think of it this way, right? When we deploy this in on-prem, we use it's like Kubernetes within Kubernetes. So what I mean by that is, we run the Kubernetes master as a Kubernetes control plane. So basically, when we have multiple user clusters, right, to manage that, you need a master, and the master runs it in another Kubernetes cluster. So that is what we call as an admin cluster. So typically, when you look at Anthos documentation, right, you would hear something called as the admin cluster and user cluster. So admin cluster is the control plane. Typically in GKE, that is hidden to you, right, because you don't see the masters, you don't interact with the masters. In the case of on-prem, that master component is taken care by the admin cluster, and then you have the user clusters, which is where your actual customer workloads would run, right? Okay. So multi-cluster, I think this particular slide talks about different multi-cluster use cases. So I kind of talked about a single pane of glass, right? So this is in the demo also I will show, but what I'm trying to say here is, once we once we basically register the clusters, whether it is on-prem or GCP or any other cloud, all those clusters would be visible in the central GCP dashboard, and from there your workflow would remain exactly the same. For example, if you want to deploy a service, if you want to do a monitoring of the GKE services, all your workflow would be from your GKE cluster. Once you register the cluster, whichever location, to the GCP platform, right? After that, the workflow would remain exactly the same. Yeah, so this is an example. Some of this Anthos talks about a cluster being in on-prem. This is like a self-managed Kubernetes. This is a Google Kubernetes engines, but you see all of them in this one single location. So I talked about Anthos config management, right? So this is where this is the module that allows a common configuration, policy, and security framework across your different clusters. And I also mentioned that this is managed as a GitOps style repository. I kind of show you what I typically mean by that here, right? Okay, this is how it is deployed. So what are some of the use cases, right? Why do we need a common policies, right? See, in Kubernetes, right, typically you have different ORBAC roles. And let's say in Istio, you have policies that allow you to talk in an encrypted manner between the services. You will have different service accounts to manage. You will have different namespaces to manage. All these are examples of policies that you would have to manage in a Kubernetes multi-cluster environment, right? And these are the policies that you would set not just in one location but for multiple locations. Now, what we have done in Anthos is uh, we have something called as a policy controller, which is based on the the gatekeeper open source policy. And what we will do is any policy that the user has defined in a Git repository. First, we validate the policy, the policy in the policy controller. Once we verify that the policy is valid, we push that policy into the GKE cluster directly from your repository to the cluster. So, which means from a user perspective, or from an operator perspective, right? Let's say you have an IT operator. The IT operator would say that okay, he would write this policy and the policy controller, the admission control request, and from their perspective, once they commit the policy, it will go to all the clusters that are managed by Anthos, right? They don't need to go to individual cluster to kind of manage that. Okay, so next is the service management. So I talked about Anthos service mesh, which is nothing but a managed Istio. This slide talks about what is the value add of service mesh, and I'm pretty sure a lot of the folks here already know it. So I think I'll kind of skip this part. So this is some of the advantages which a service mesh itself provides, right? You have uniform observability, you have operational agility, you have a policy-driven security, right? All these are features which Istio provides. And because of these features, you can also have a kind of a service level dashboard, right? You don't not just look at your pods and containers. You can also start looking at services. I think when I do the demo, right, I'll kind of illustrate some of these facts. So what we have done as part of Anthos service meshes, the different components like Pilot, Mixer, Citadel, all that become managed service, and also we give observability for these services with a service level objective. Actually, I think when I do the demo, it will be more clear. This one is pretty unique because you are able to get metrics and visibility into things, which is very essential in a distributed application. So I think when I talk about the demo, I'll cover that. Okay. So the last part about is the from a developer perspective, right? If they want to run serverless on top of Anthos platform, they can do that using Cloud Run, which is nothing but a managed service that is on top of Knative. So mainly, right, this is kind of targeted towards customers who basically say that, what, Kubernetes is very complex to me, and trying to write all the Kubernetes manifest file and maintaining that is a huge headache. All I want is my application to get deployed, and I do not need to worry about it, right? Again, these are two kinds of use cases. Um, one use case is people who want to manage everything on their own, who want a lot of flexibility, and they can do that in Kubernetes. And for others kind of use cases where I want a completely managed serverless platform, they can come to Cloud Run, right? So those are the two use cases we are targeting, and Cloud Run is more for the use case which targets very simplified application deployment and management. And it can even give you things like scale to zero, right? With Kubernetes, right, you normally cannot get a scale to zero, right? You at least need to have one single pod running, right? And for some of the use cases, that might be a little, I might not even need, right? If there is no traffic that is coming in, I want to have a complete scale to zero, right? And that is something Cloud Run can provide. All right, so I think I will skip this. Okay, so I kind of talked about this marketplace. So if you go to the Anthos, I'll show that in the demo, right? Anthos marketplace. You will see a bunch of applications, right? These could be things like a GitLab or an Airflow, There are around 100 applications currently that is certified. So these, when I say certified, these are running as containers, and they can run either in, on-prem or in cloud, and it's certified to run in either location, right? Few other things around Anthos I just want to quickly walk through. So this is, we call it as migrate for Anthos. So this is something a little unique that is there. What the use case here is, um, lot of enterprises have legacy applications, and the effort involved to migrate them to containers, right, it's pretty extensive. People have to go through 3 to 6 month cycle to convert a legacy application and modernize them to containers, right? So what we thought is, what if we can give a functionality where we can do a one step conversion from your VMs to containers, right? So in this case, you still convert from your monolithic VM to a monolithic container, at least at the first step. But the advantage you get with by doing that is, a lot of the things, advantages around containers, right? Your patchability, your scalability, your agility, portability, all that functionality you keep getting, right, when you move to containers, right? So migrate for Anthos is a solution that is coming, that is, it comes along with Anthos platform, which gives you a capability to convert from VMs to containers in a single shot. Okay, last thing I want to mention is, people want to know and understand, how does Anthos compare to the competition, right? Again, the goal of this slide is not to go into each feature and say that how does Anthos compare to competition, but the approach that Anthos takes to how the competition is taking it. Not to say that one is better than the other. So compared to, let's say, the approach that other cloud providers took from an Outpost or Azure Stack perspective, this is a complete software-based solution. Then if you compare to, let's say, more of a OpenShift or a PKS kind of a solution, the first one goes from cloud to on-prem, the second one goes from on-prem to cloud. I think the way we see our platform is it's better integrated with the cloud services. So that is kind of where I think we think our unique value proposition is. And the last is obviously, the complete stack is built on open source with the set of managed services added on top of that. Okay, so with that, I will stop the presentation and I will get into a demo. Okay, so here what I think I will give a background of what I have done, right? Actually, I have two projects currently where I have Anthos running. The first project that I have here, um, I had some difficulty in deploying the services, but I'll just show in this particular project, right? I have 3 clusters running. So one is a GKE cluster. The second one is a regular Kubernetes cluster, which basically it's kind of installed like with a tool like Kops, not a GKE, but it's a Kops kind of a cluster. And the third is an Anthos cluster. When I say Anthos cluster, it's an on-prem cluster, which is running on VMware, right? And this, I have deployed it, but I think the demo which we are going to use, I'm going to use a different project. So I'll show that here. So I have 2 clusters running here. Both these clusters are running in GKE, and they are managed by Anthos, right? And I will try to walk through the different features that we have kind of talked through in this slide, right? So first, let's talk about the cluster manager, right? So this is a single pane. The Anthos. Okay, I think the first dashboard is the main thing, right? Currently, the dashboard talks about 2 things. It's basically tries to give you the complete health of your Anthos environment, right? So at this point, everything is healthy. The clusters are healthy. The service mesh is also healthy. Then we go to the clusters. We see the cluster view, where I have 2 clusters running. So let's first talk about the service mesh feature, right? Okay, so currently what I have done in this particular environment is we have deployed a service. It is like a I think we call it the online boutique service. It's like it's an e-commerce portal which has a whole bunch of services that is running. You know, like an cart service, ad service, currency, email. There's around 20 services running uh, in this as microservices. So the way now that Istio is also installed in it, and what Anthos Service Mesh is going to show is it's going to show all these services. Now this is the table view. If I look at the topology view, so basically what this will do is, because Istio is present in all these services and running in a sidecar, I will be able to look at all the services as a topology view. And if you look at it, what are the parameters I'm going to get out of this, right? So I can look at things like what is the number of requests per second to the service, what is the error rate, and I can look at the latency at a 50th percentile, 95th, or 99th percentile, right? I can even look at what is the traffic that is going on between the two services. So let's basically go back to the table view, and let's say I go to the front end service. Okay, I think before that, let me just show you. Before I go to Stackdriver, let me go to the regular Kubernetes view of the cluster. So this is what most of the folks would be familiar with. This is the regular, the Kubernetes dashboard. The dashboard that I showed you here, which is the Anthos dashboard, right? So this is pretty new. I think most of you guys might not be able to see it. I think you might see it a week later. But this is how the dashboard would look. So a few things changed in the last 1 week. I'm not sure whether you guys will be able to see this at this point, but in a week later you will be able to see it. Now this particular cluster view, right? This doesn't change much. I can still go to the regular GKE clusters. I can look at the workloads, services. That flow does not change. Uh, but once the cluster is registered with Anthos, then you get this additional functionality. That is what I'm kind of currently showing, because folks might get confused about, I'm regularly used to the GKE cluster view. How is this different, right? So that's why I wanted to highlight that. Okay, so I was talking about the service mesh. So let me go to the front end service. Okay, so now here I can look at some of the details I talked about earlier, right? The same I mentioned here, right? The different parameters of this particular service. I can also look at what are the services that are talking to this service, right? I can also see here that I'm not using encrypted communication. Let's look at some of the metrics. So this I can look at metrics as a graphical view. So now one other thing that I can do here is I can create a service level objective. So let me show you what I'm trying to say. So basically, let's say that as an operator, you have different services running in your system, and you want to set a service level indicator. Based on the service level indicator, you want to set a service level objective. So basically, for example, there are two kinds of current indicators I can set, either based on availability or latency. Let's say I select latency, and I say that my latency threshold of 25 millisecond, and I say that it should be met 90% of the time, and I just do rolling for 1 day. Okay, so what I have done here is I have set a service level objective, and if you look here, right, I already know that I'm not meeting the objective. because if you look at my current latency number, right, it's around 25 millisecond for 50% of the time, right? So, but it's okay. But let me just submit this. Okay, so I've submitted this, and what my requirement is to have a 90% latency, which is rolling day, and currently I am only at a 47% compliance. If I go here in the overview, so it will tell me one of my SLO is out of error budget. So okay, so what I'm trying to highlight here is, by using Anthos Service Mesh, you can pretty much get visibility into all the things that is happening around the services, set an SLO, SLI, and SLO, get an alert when anything goes out of bound. So you have complete visibility over your services, right? So that is how it can be done. Now, in this case, right, I have deployed this service in a single cluster. Now, you can extend this and deploy this same service across multiple clusters as well. By using Istio multi-cluster, you can keep the services running across different clusters, and by using ingress on Anthos, you can also load balance traffic between the two clusters. So you can do either one of them. It's an extension of what I am showing here, right? Okay, the last feature I will kind of talk about is the config management. So currently, right, so I have, if I go to the config management view, I have two clusters, and both the clusters are synced. What it means by synced is, they are synced to a common Git repository. So here I have the repository here. This repository is running in my cloud source managed cloud source repository inside the GCP itself. But I think what I will do is I will go to the so currently what I have done is I have a jump box that is connected to both the clusters. And this is the repository which has the complete the config management aspect of it. So let me just show you. Okay, before that, I'll show you what are the two clusters. So these are the two clusters that I have here, right? And I'll show the structure of this config repository, right? So this is how my the config policy repository looks like. So what here it says is, these are the two namespaces: Istio system namespace and online boutique is my namespace that I have created. And here it tells me, what are the policies, right? Let's say, for example, if I have an RBAC policy, now I will check all my RBAC policies, service accounts, all these here. Whatever namespaces I have, I will, kind of put it here, right? So in this example, what first we'll start off with this. I am in this particular cluster. So let me look at what are my namespaces. Okay, so these are my current namespaces in this cluster. As an example, what we will do is we'll change two policies and see that how the policies get propagated to the clusters, right? What I will do first is I'll show you what is the so I'll show. Okay, so currently what I have done here is, I think I'll show you what is the command I try to do here. I try to look at what is my Istio systems TLS policy. So that is what I try to print here. And what my current TLS policy is disabled. So what that means is when two services are talking across each other in the Istio service mesh, it is not needed to have TLS, right? TLS is optional. So that is how the currently the policy is configured. Now, what we will do now is we will basically change the policy to make it always TLS enabled. So that is one change we'll make. And the other change we'll make is we'll create a new namespace. And after I make these two changes, I will commit that change to the repository. After I commit that change, Anthos config manager, what it will do is pull the changes automatically from the config repository to both the clusters. So that is what we will try to highlight now. So I'll quickly show the demo. So I'm just going to cut and paste some of these commands. So hopefully it should not take a lot of time. Okay, first I'll show you how the policy is set. Okay, so if you look at what my mesh policy is, I have set my mesh policy as permissive, and I will also show you what my destination rule is. And my destination rule is set to disable. Because of these two configurations, I'm not having TLS between the two services, right? So I'll make a couple of changes. So first I will change my mesh policy. And then I will change my destination rule. Okay, so I've done that. Okay, so then what I will do is, okay, I'll also add a new namespace. So what I will do, create something called the test namespace. Okay, so I've done this. So basically I made two changes now. One is I've changed the policy of HTO to be TLS enabled, and I've created a new namespace. So nothing is going to change because I'm just changing in my Git repository. So at this point, let me add this change to the, commit to this to the repository. Okay, so I've made the change, I'll push it. Okay, so now I've pushed it. So let's just do a quick watch of the namespace. Okay, I already see my test namespace that has come here. And so I am in first cluster. So let me go to the second cluster. I see the same test namespace in the second cluster as well. Now let's look at the Istio policy. Okay, so now you can see that the Istio policy is Istio mutual. So that is the policy change that we have made, and both the clusters have got the policy to be applied. So basically the flow here is, as an operator, we change the policy in a common repository. The operator in the clusters, when I say second time, when I say the operator, I'm talking about the config management operator in the clusters, right? They pull in the changes and apply it to both the clusters. So that is what has happened in this particular flow. Okay, last thing I will mention is the stack driver part. Stack driver, pretty much remains the same, but in case folks have not used that, I would suggest folks can play with it especially for the the new Kubernetes engine dashboard. So this one is pretty neat because it gives you a view across the infrastructure or across your workloads or across your services. So you can kind of dig deep based on how you as a developer you can look at it in one angle, as an operator you can look at it in different angle, right? It gives you flexibility to look at it at different angles and be able to group it either at a pod level. You want to look at statistics at say service or a pod or a container or a deployment. You can look at it at any level of depth, right? So it becomes easy for you to, if you want to isolate problems, you can easily isolate it this way. All right, so I think we're almost running out of time, so I want to stop here. Um, thanks for listening.